It was late at night. The road stretched on, empty except for the occasional car passing by. My phone had died hours ago, and the radio signal kept cutting in and out, leaving me in a silence that felt heavier with every passing mile. The darkness of the asphalt seemed to swallow everything: my thoughts, the road, even the stars above. I was starting to feel the weight of it all when I saw the headlights of my car reflect off something in the distance. A gas station. It was the only sign of life for miles. Its faint lights flickered in the distance, almost like a beacon, so I turned toward it. I didn't have much of a choice. The fuel gauge was on empty, and I had to stop. I pulled into the station, the gravel crunching beneath my tires as I parked. The station was old. You could tell by the cracked signs and the faded paint on the walls. It looked abandoned, like it hadn't been used in years. There was something off about it though. A strange feeling in the air that I couldn't quite put my finger on. The attendant appeared from the shadows, his face pale under the dim light. He didn't move quickly. He almost seemed to drag himself toward me. His chest rose and fell with shallow, rapid breaths, like he couldn't get enough air, like he was suffocating. I got out of the car, shaking off the unease, and walked toward the shop. The air inside hit me like a wall, cold and heavy, the kind of cold that seemed to settle deep in your bones. The inside of the shop was just as old as the outside. On the shelves were cans and snacks that looked like they hadn't been touched in ages. The attendant didn't speak, but his eyes were on me wide, filled with fear and something else I couldn't place. It was like he hadn't slept in days. "Hi, I'll need a tank of gas," I said, trying to break the silence. His eyes didn't leave mine, but his voice trembled when he spoke. "You need to leave. Now." I stopped. His words sent a shiver down my spine. I thought he was joking at first, but his eyes, those wide, terrified eyes, told me something was very wrong. There was no one else in the shop. It was silent, too silent for a gas station that should have been open. I looked around, expecting to see another customer, maybe someone else who could explain why he was acting this way. But there was no one. I asked again, my voice quieter this time, "Why? What's going on?" The attendant didn't answer right away. He just kept staring at the corner of the shop. His eyes shifted nervously, almost like he was afraid of something or someone in that corner. I followed his gaze, my curiosity getting the better of me. The corner was dark, really dark, but there was something there. I couldn't make out what it was, but it was like a shadow, a presence that didn't quite belong. I squinted, but it was hard to focus. It didn't make sense. The corner was just a shelf, a few dusty boxes, nothing to be afraid of. Or so I thought. When I looked back at the attendant, he was still staring, his gaze fixed. He looked terrified. "You're the second customer today. But I thought you came in alone," he said, his voice shaky. A chill ran through me. Second customer. I was the only one here. There hadn't been anyone before me. The more I thought about it, the more confused I got. My heart started to race, and the air around me grew thicker, heavier. What did he mean? Was someone else here? Was I missing something? Suddenly, a sound came from the corner. I heard a soft shuffle, like someone was moving. My blood ran cold. I turned quickly, but when I looked, there was nothing, no one, just that same empty corner. I turned back to the attendant. His face had gone even paler. He wasn't looking at me anymore. His eyes were fixed on that corner again, his lips trembling. I couldn't breathe. Something wasn't right. Something was very wrong here. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The attendant didn't answer at first. His eyes flicked to mine, then back to the corner. Finally, he spoke, his voice almost a whisper. "It's up to you whether you leave or not," he said. "But once you start noticing things, it'll be too late." My instincts screamed at me to get out of there, to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I stood frozen, my mind spinning with questions. I tried to leave, to walk back to the car, but something was pulling at me, holding me in place. I could feel it, something behind me, following me. I glanced back and I could hear footsteps, but there was no one there. My heart pounded in my chest, and my breath came out in short gasps. The air around me felt colder, heavier, like I was being suffocated. I quickened my pace, my steps unsteady, and rushed to the car. I jumped inside and slammed the door shut, the engine starting with a loud roar. I sped off, my hands shaking on the wheel, my mind reeling. As I drove away, one thought kept running through my head. I was supposed to be the second customer today, but when I walked in, I was alone. Or was I? Something was wrong. Something I didn't understand. But I wasn't about to go back to figure it out. Not now, not ever. It was past midnight when I pulled into the gas station on that desolate road. The journey had been long, and the cold air seeped through the cracks of my tiredness. My mind was a jumble of thoughts. Should I keep going, or should I take a break? Something about the stillness of the night felt off, like I wasn't meant to be driving this road alone. But when I saw the gas station, a strange sense of relief washed over me. I'd rest for a few minutes, fill up my tank, grab a snack, and then continue. I was alone, no other cars in sight, and the lights of the station flickered weakly in the distance, casting long shadows across the empty lot. I parked and stepped out, feeling the weight of exhaustion in my legs. The place felt like it had been abandoned for years, and yet there was something oddly comforting about its solitude. I quickly filled up the gas tank, then decided to use the restroom before I hit the road again. The restroom was just as old as the rest of the place. The yellowish lighting made everything look even older, and the walls had marks and stains from years of neglect. My footsteps echoed in the silence, and the air inside was thick with the musty scent of something forgotten. It was strange being here alone in the middle of nowhere, but it wouldn't take long. I'd be in and out quickly. I entered the restroom, and no one was inside. Of course not, it was well past midnight, and this place felt abandoned. I washed my hands, glancing at the mirror above the sink, and that's when something felt off. For a second, I thought I was seeing things. My reflection was moving the same way I was, but there was a delay, just a fraction of a second behind me. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just my tired eyes playing tricks on me. But then, it happened again. I stopped, lifting my head. My reflection didn't. It stayed tilted, as if looking at me, even though I was standing upright. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I felt my body go cold. The reflection in the mirror wasn't moving with me, it was delayed. I pulled my hands away from the sink, but the reflection didn't follow my movement. It stayed, looking at me with its head still tilted. I took a step back. The reflection did the same, but with an unnatural delay. And then it did something I wasn't prepared for. It leaned forward, as though it was trying to reach out to me. But it wasn't me doing that. It was the reflection, using its own will, its own movement. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. I stepped backward again, slowly, but the reflection didn't break its gaze. Its eyes seemed to follow me, step for step. Every time I moved, it moved in the opposite direction, almost as if it were mocking me, or worse, trying to trap me. Panic surged through me. I quickly finished washing my hands and forced myself to look away. But when I lifted my head to look at the mirror again, the reflection was still there, still moving against me. My own reflection, but not mine. It wasn't just copying, MIT was doing its own thing. Moving in the opposite direction of my own body, slowly advancing toward me. I couldn't stay there any longer. I turned and bolted for the door. When I stepped outside, the chill of the night air hit me, but it didn't help clear my mind. My heart was pounding, my thoughts a blur of confusion and fear. I glanced back at the restroom, half expecting to see the reflection standing in the doorway, staring at me. But there was nothing. The restroom was empty, just as it had been when I walked in. My skin crawled with the eerie sensation that something had been there, something that shouldn't have been. I walked over to the cashier, hoping the normalcy of paying for my gas would help shake the strange feeling that clung to me. But when I approached, the cashier smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was different, like he knew something I didn't. He looked at me with eyes that seemed to see right through me. "You shouldn't stare into the mirror for too long," he said, his voice calm, but his eyes never leaving mine. I froze. The words seemed innocent enough, but the way he said them, the strange weight behind them, made my stomach twist. I looked at him, confused, trying to make sense of it. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking, though I tried to keep it steady. The cashier stepped a little closer, his eyes never blinking, his smile still fixed on his face. "Sometimes seeing something makes it come after you, like something following you." The words hit me like a cold wave. A chill ran down my spine, and my throat tightened with dread. I didn't know what he meant, but at that moment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, something from the mirror. The way the reflection had moved, not like me, but like something else, something waiting. I turned to leave, my legs trembling, my mind racing. But as I walked toward the door, the hairs on my neck stood up again. That feeling hadn't gone away. The reflection, the strange movement, it was like it was still with me, walking behind me, matching my every step. I stepped outside into the cold night air, but it felt like something was still in the shadows, following me. I quickened my pace, glancing over my shoulder. Nothing was there, of course. Nothing but the empty lot and the gas station, dimly lit in the night. But that feeling didn't go away. Something had followed me out of that restroom, and as I got into my car and started the engine, I realized one thing: what the cashier had said wasn't just a warning, it was a truth. Something had seen me, something in that mirror, and now it was following me. It was late at night, and I was nearing the end of my journey. I had been behind the wheel for what felt like an eternity, my eyes heavy and my mind wandering. The endless stretch of road had been nothing but a blur of headlights and darkened landscapes. It was around 2 a.m., and the miles of empty, desolate highway ahead of me seemed to stretch into nothingness. I was so far out in the middle of nowhere that I could no longer count on any sign of life to break the silence. The road, the stillness, and the weight of the solitude were starting to feel oppressive. At that moment, a flicker of light in the distance caught my attention. A gas station. I squinted through the darkness, making sure it wasn't a trick of the light, and as I drew closer, I could see the dim glow of its sign. The lights in front of the station cut through the heavy night air, and for the first time in hours, I felt a sense of relief. It wasn't much, but it was something. I needed to stretch my legs, grab a snack, and maybe get a little rest before continuing the long stretch of road ahead. I pulled in slowly, the tires crunching over the gravel as I parked. The place was eerily quiet. There were no other cars in sight, no signs of life other than the faint hum of the lights above. The gas station looked like it was hanging on by a thread, the building's worn exterior and the flickering lights giving it a feeling of abandonment, even though it was still operating. When I walked inside, I was greeted by the cashier, a middle-aged man with a weary expression. He looked up at me, but there was something strange in his eyes, something unsettling. His gaze seemed familiar, as though he knew me, but I couldn't place why. It made my skin crawl, though I couldn't explain why. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes were sharp, studying me, and the intensity of his stare made me feel like I was being weighed and measured. "Before you came in, did you see anyone on the road?" The question caught me off guard. His voice was soft, but it carried a hint of something else. Fear, maybe. A strange urgency. It was almost as though he didn't just want to know who was on the road, but needed to know. I paused, my heart skipping a beat. Thousands of questions raced through my mind. Why was he asking me this? Why did it sound like he was scared? "No," I replied, my voice steady despite the unease creeping up inside me. "I didn't see anyone else on the road." My answer felt simple enough, but the cashier didn't seem satisfied. He nodded slowly, but there was no sense of relief in his expression. If anything, he seemed even more on edge. That's when I noticed him, the man, standing slightly behind the cashier. He was tall, with a gaunt, pale face that didn't look right in the dim light of the gas station. His features were drawn and hollow, but what bothered me the most was the fact that he wasn't facing me. His back was to me, his face turned away, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just standing there. He felt like he was watching me from the corner of my eye, even though he wasn't looking directly at me. I couldn't explain it, but his presence unnerved me. I tried to dismiss the thought and focus on the cashier, who still had his eyes fixed on me, but then he took a small step toward me. His face grew even paler, and his voice dropped to a whisper. "Don't find me. Don't go back." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. The terror in his voice was palpable, and for the first time since I had entered the gas station, I felt the weight of fear pressing down on me. What did he mean by "don't go back"? Why was he saying this to me? His words didn't make sense, and the way his eyes darted nervously around the room only deepened my confusion. Before I could say anything, he turned and hurried toward the back of the station, his footsteps echoing through the silence. The man standing behind him didn't move an inch. He remained rooted in place, his face still turned away, but now I could see his hands pale, long fingers gripping the counter, unmoving. I stood there, frozen for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. The cashier's words echoed in my mind. "Don't find me. Don't go back." What did it mean? And why was he so terrified? There was something deeply wrong about this situation, and I couldn't put my finger on it. I had to leave. One had to get out of there. My heart raced as I quickly turned and made my way to the exit. Each step felt like an eternity as my footsteps echoed louder than they should have. When I pushed open the door and stepped outside, I could feel the cool night air wash over me, but it did nothing to calm the panic building inside my chest. I looked back, but the gas station was silent now. The lights still hummed, but there was no movement. The cashier was gone, vanished into the back room. and the man was still standing by the counter, not moving, not making a sound. I quickly walked toward my car, but a strange feeling gnawed at me. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in my bones, like an invisible force pulling me back to that station. My heart pounded as I tried to shake the thoughts from my head. The man was still standing there, and though I had walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me. It was as if he was waiting for me to look back, waiting for me to make a mistake. I got into my car and started the engine, my hands trembling slightly as I shifted it into reverse. I drove away, but the unease in my chest didn't fade. The words the cashier had spoken, "Don't go back, don't find me," kept replaying in my mind, louder with every passing second. What did he mean? What was he trying to warn me about? I glanced in my rearview mirror, but the gas station was already fading into the distance, the dark outline of the building disappearing as I sped down the road. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was just fear, the kind of fear that comes from isolation and a long night on the road. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just that. There was something else, something far darker. As I drove, my mind kept drifting back to the gas station. The silence that had fallen after the cashier left. The man standing there, motionless. What had happened to the cashier? Why had he run, and what was it that had been so terrifying about that man? I couldn't stop thinking about it. The fear, the way it had taken over that place, the way it had taken over the cashier's face. Something was wrong there. Something dangerous. I kept my eyes on the road, but every now and then, a glance at the rearview mirror made my heart race. I felt as though something was just out of sight, waiting for me to look back. It was too much to handle. The terror, the unanswered questions, they were too much to bear. By the time I reached the next town, the gas station had become nothing more than a shadow in my past, a fleeting memory. But I knew one thing for sure, would never go back. Not for anything. Because whatever was there, whatever dark presence lingered in that station, I wasn't meant to understand it. It was something that would never leave my mind, something that would always haunt me. And as much as I wanted to forget it, I knew I never would.